Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure to do so below, and you'll get notified when we post our newest episodes. I'm Jim Morrison, and thankfully today we have our founder and CEO, Joan Trice, back with us. She'll be speaking with George Dell to discuss the hot topic of market value and how appraisers should handle it during a crazy market. Joan, I'll hand it over to you.
Jim, thank you very much. And George, it's great seeing you. And I saw you just a few weeks ago at Valuation Expo in Las Vegas, and you were in the audience when my particular panel on modernizing the appraisal process was under discussion. And one of the topics was the definition of market value. And you shared with the audience, I thought was hysterically funny. You rewrote the definition, but go ahead and tell us about some upcoming events that you have, and then let's dive into talking about market value.
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, very briefly, I do a weekly webinar that's free. Haven't missed a week in over 5 years. And the philosophy of that is I don't give answers. I just ask uncomfortable questions. Also teach a class, stats, scraps, and data science that answers some of these issues that we're talking about today. And then, of course, I do a monthly webinar, and coming up December 3rd, Valuemetrics with Fannie Mae. Actually, the first one I did was about 5 months ago. It was on price indexing time adjustments, and I was absolutely blown out. We had over 1,000 people sign up.
Wow, that's a big audience for
yeah, knocked me off my chair.
Yeah,
right at 1,000. We had to increase the fee to Zoom twice. We had to break it to 500 and then to 1,000 to get everybody in there. So it's worked. And then I also do write a paid report, the asset analyst report. Anyway, what we're talking about there with the market value thing was a groupthink thing. And 10, 12 years ago, I was thinking, you know, we're really ignoring some elements of that market value definition.
Not some of them. We're ignoring most of them.
Well, I'm talking about where my brain went. My brain was in this groupthink thing, like, oh, it's perfectly okay. Then I started to question, and I said, let me break the definition down into some bullet points. Okay, buyer, seller acting prudently, knowledgeably, not affected by undue stimulus. Well, wait a minute, we got the
what is undue stimulus?
That one bothered
helicopter
me.
Money.
And just like you said, the more I looked at this, the more I asked myself questions, the more issues came up. Typically motivated. Well, they weren't motivated. Well-informed, well-advised, reasonable exposure time, cash dollars, that was okay. Unaffected by special creative financing, that bothered me too. So that, wow, we're kind of ignoring all this, and yet appraisers were getting blamed for all the damage. So that's groupthink, when everybody thinks the same way, but it's wrong. And right. Everybody thinks it's okay. So I said, what was actually happening? I call it the George Dell operative definition of market value. What was really happening? Well, buyer and seller were each acting speculatively with the exuberance. Remember those words, over exuberance? I stole that word.
Irrational exuberance was Robert Schiller's.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Affected by universal euphoria. Do you remember how we were all going to be rich? Everything was going to be wonderful from this point on in life and the whole world. Buyer and seller are avariciously motivated. Get mine, let me get mine. Both parties are uninformed and advised by commissioned salespeople. Just get the commission. Reasonable time for exposure. I said, oh, well, that one's okay. And then payment in cash, gee, that one felt okay too. Later on, I changed even those. And then finally, the properties, the normal consideration enabled by unrestricted, special, and creative financing provided by commissioned salespeople. Well, and I go, wow, this is what was really happening. And then later on, if I can expand on this, my assistant Cindy said, well, she said, George, if I recall correctly, there was no exposure time at all. People were lined up to buy houses. There was a waiting list. There was no exposure time at all. So I had to revise that bullet point also. Then push forward about 2 or 3 years, I was doing my specialty, which is valuing views with some of those really expensive homes overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And there was this one project I walked into, and these are like all multi-million dollars houses, between $3 and $7, $10, $12 million. And I realized that it was hard. About half of them were vacant or more. Very few people even there. And my brain said, well, okay, these are very wealthy people. They have 3 or 4 houses, so I didn't expect them to be there. Then as I researched it some more, I realized that about 1/3 of the sales were, are you ready for this? Were to Chinese nationals who were bringing their money over here because they felt their money was safer in Southern California with a view. And they were, the highest and best use for them was not a home, a place to live. It was a place to park their money.
Right.
It was just a way of
So they're
leveraging.
not typically motivated.
No, it was, so the assumption of highest and best use being a home was wrong. So there we go. 7 out of 7 were wrong on the definition of market
But
value.
let me ask you a question, and I go back and forth in that. I have multiple questions, George, but number one is, do you think that the definition of market value is sufficient, or do you think we need to open it up and take a look and maybe talk about, or at least consider something similar to what the Europeans do, which is a sustainable lending value?
Absolutely. I'm not sure if I'm completely comfortable with the word sustainable value, but something close to that.
Or just a lending value, and then within
Yeah.
the definition.
When I first became an appraiser, I was appraising to loan value as well as market value. And then one of our clients wanted a quick sale price. So I was already dealing
There's
with
all kinds of definite,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and particularly with the bias and racial bias issues. Actually, interesting. I'm coming to the CRN that you're doing in Sarasota, and I find it interesting that Ed Pinto with the AEI is one of your speakers,
Mhm.
and I know he's come out in favor of something like a fundamental value. And the fundamental value is not market price. I mean, market price sometimes is not the real value. Fundamental value is the value of housing as related to all other goods and services, including food and transportation and schooling, everything else. So fundamental value. Well, he's come out actually using those words, fundamental value. And then Andre Perry, who is politically, I love the contrast that you have of these two speakers. And yet from what I
Yeah, because
read,
they're both going to be speaking on
Oh, I
December
love it. I
7th
love
at the
it.
CRN meeting.
Thank you
It's
for
gonna be
having
fun.
them both.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward. But Andre Perry from the Brookings Metro hasn't used the word fundamental value, but one of his proposed possible solutions for bias or perceived bias or value differences in those neighborhoods is what is effectively fundamental value. So when I'm there, I'm going to take the opportunity to possibly say, hey, you guys agree on something. The fundamental value concept, which may or may not be a tool for solving whatever problems may or may not exist, but I'm just trying to help find solutions, and that's one of them. Yes, something other than market price. Our definition of market value is not really market value; it's market price.
No, I agree. And that just the very opening, market value means the most probable price. As soon as they mention the word price,
Right.
That's when the whole definition falls apart.
Sure.
I think
Sure.
honestly, the rest of it, I don't have a problem with, other than, they're using price and value interchangeably. And as you said, they're not always interchangeable. And that also leads me to the discussion of AVMs. Is an AVM really a sale price model? It's not a valuation model, is it?
Looking for better turn times, the ability to automate routine tasks, and stay in compliance with your appraisal management process? Evo's state-of-the-art appraisal management technology for residential and commercial real estate lenders and AMCs was built with the user in mind. Evo streamlines the appraisal experience with configurable workflow design that automates 100% of routine tasks, alerts you along the way, and gives you powerful reports to make timely decisions. It's the only platform in the market with total customizations out of the box without IT development intervention. Find out more at globaldms.com or call 877-866-2747. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So, George, let's get back to the discussion of price versus value for a minute.
Sure.
Is an AVM really an AVM, or is it an SPM, a sale price model?
You do to me what I do to other people, ask difficult questions. um, I don't know if you know or not, I'm actively involved with the AVM standards committee right now under the Appraisal Foundation.
I thought it was a timely topic.
And it's always been an interesting, I've done AVM consulting to AVM companies and that kind of thing. So it's a comfortable topic for me. What I always come back to is the valuation process is the valuation process. Everything else is a matter of who does it and when. The appraisal process is really very simple. You get the data, you massage the data, you predict from the data, and then you communicate it or interpret it. 4 things. And AVMs, appraisals, BPOs, evaluations, they really all follow exactly those 4 same steps. It's a matter of who does it and when.
Well, is an AVM really a sale price model as opposed to a valuation model? Because if you're going to have a valuation model, don't you have to be able to analyze these things in a definition of market value? Machine can't analyze what the motivations of a buyer and seller, or if they're informed, or if there's seller concessions. I don't think an AVM knows any of those things.
Well, yeah, yes and no. An AVM is actually able to figure some of those things out better than appraisers can, as it turns out. That's my.
Give me an example of that, George.
Again, I have to go back to my background is I have substantial graduate education in economics, econometrics, and statistics. And I was already an appraiser when I went back to school, taking class after class, graduate level classes. But one of the things that piqued me, and everything I learned, I was trying to figure out, how does this apply to appraisal? And one of my earliest models that bothered me actually goes back to this definition of market value. This was like two and a half cycles ago. And one of my clients did a lot of what they considered affordable community area. In this one particular neighborhood, about 25% of the house, 25% of the houses were owned by banks. They were REOs. And I would run into doing a simple, basic house. I was doing a lot of houses at that time. And right across the street and one door over would be an identical property that just sold, but it was bank owned. So, okay, so that has to be a different motivation. And what I learned in my economics classes, if you don't have a variable that measures motivation, you find another variable that's highly correlated to what you're looking for, highly correlated to motivation, but highly uncorrelated to everything else in the world. And MLS was still pretty crude back then, but I thought, well, what field in the MLS could help me here? And economists literally make their whole career on discovering one stand-in variable like this. And I thought, oh my God, it's occupant. Bank-owned properties are generally vacant. And there was this field in my MLS that had three possible answers that the brokers could plug in: vacant, VAC, tenant, TEN, and owner, OWN. So I just simply compared the owner occupied to the vacant, and lo and behold, it was a large enough neighborhood, it was easy for me to gather data and throw it into a spreadsheet and compare those two. And Joan, I got to tell you, at that time, the difference was so consistent, about 8, 9, 10%. And it got worse. It went up to as high as 14% difference for vacant properties. And then over time, it kept going down, 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 until a few years later, we're talking about how markets shift. The market completely went the other way. And literally, the vacant houses started selling for more by 2 or 3%. And you go, well, how could that be? Well, you can just hear a couple that's trying to buy a house. Hey, Ma, I found one that we can move into right away. Let's get that one. So I tracked that particular neighborhood for many years, and it went from as high as 14, 15, 16% to minus 3, 4%. So yes, is it measuring motivation directly? No. But is it fairly reliable?
Indirectly,
It works. It works.
No. No, I can see
That was
that.
one of my first successes in using algorithms and econometric methods for valuation.
Do you think there are flaws in the current residential process? And I'm almost thinking more policy that's guiding, not that the theoretical process. I'm talking about what we're actually doing. And what I'm trying to lead you to is we're only doing one approach to value, the sales price approach to value.
Right.
And what happens when you kick the other two legs of that three-legged stool out from under? Aren't we doing the sale price approach to value as opposed to market value?
Yes, exactly. Again,
I'm glad you agree with me, because I think this conversation would have been over, George.
Well, you ask one question, I hear 5 questions, and I'm thinking about
I
the
know.
relationship to bias and the definition. My brain just goes nuts.
Should we be doing 3 approaches to value? And especially, I mean, in this crazy market, as Jim defined it, as an example, the income approach. Well, not every house is rented, but boy, with the advent of today's technology in short-term rental markets with Airbnb and VRBO, people are actually buying properties specifically for short-term rentals, and not every property qualifies to be even leased on a short-term basis. So I see this as really impacting value rather tremendously, and we're ignoring it.
Sure. When the Appraisal Institute and other organizations, the society started years ago, there were 6 or 7 approaches to value. Then it got cut down to 5, then it got down to 3 or 4, and it pretty well stuck on 3 ever since. My personal belief is that we really are only using one approach to value, as you call the sales comparison approach. And the cost approach really is just a form of what can I substitute with a new house for the house I've got. So it's in a manner, yeah, okay, I see you're smiling. It's really just another form of the sales comparing it to.
I see it though as a mathematical proof.
Sure.
Which is why it's necessary, because I mean, I started life as a commercial appraiser, and when those two numbers were really far apart, it made me sit back and go, what is going on here?
Right.
And it just makes you think. That whole reconciliation process is lost when you're not reconciling multiple approaches.
Oh, I agree. It helps my appraiser head ask the right questions. It's using the visual and the summary statistics, if you want to call it that, helps me ask the right question. And actually, the income approach is even more interesting because although it's a ratio like capitalization rates and gross income multiplier, well, up until 10, 15, 20, about 15, 20 years ago, the GIM for residential was considered part of the sales comparison approach. And yet it's really an income approach, which to me, it's like, I gotcha.
Yeah.
So I basically believe that there really is only one approach. In fact, when we use the evidence-based valuation or data science viewpoint on valuing or appraising, there's only one approach. And it's just a matter which variables tell the tale better.
Yeah.
They're all in one formula.
Indeed. So let's break right here for another commercial message, and we'll be right back.
Appraisers, what if you could inspect, photograph, and measure a home without leaving yours? With Remote Val, you get to harness the power of new technology without giving up your process or compromising on quality. With our easy-to-use software, you connect to the homeowner's phone and complete your inspection as you normally would. Remote Val lets you capture high-quality, meta-tagged photos, take accurate measurements, and communicate directly with the homeowner to get the information you need. Remote Val is fast, easy to use, and completely free for appraisers. To see a demo of Remote Val in action, visit incenteram.com. That's incenteram.com. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So, George, let's talk a little bit about, and we've had this discussion for multiple decades, is art versus science. I know the whole world wants less art, more science. We are trying to measure the behavior of humans.
Yes,
It's kind of tricky, isn't it?
absolutely. Absolutely. My answer to that is what we really need is better art and better science. In fact, my end conclusion is that the ideal solution is a proper blend, optimization of the art with the science. When I became an appraisal, just scratching together 3 or 4 comps was 80% of the job. I'd make a phone call and the broker would call back and I'd take a deep breath. I got this one nailed. I turned it over to the typist and 2 days later I get that back. I edit it with a red pen and 2 days later it's done. And then data started getting easier. I mean, a long story made short, today it's really easy. In 0.2 of a second, I do what took me 4 days before.
Right.
And the nature of the challenge that appraiser have faced is that we used to, the job was scratching together 3 or 4 comps. Today, it's how do you make sense out of 12 or 120 or 12,000 data points? And then what do you do when you genuinely only have 1 or 0 comps? I mean, true comps. But it's a whole spectrum. And that's what data science really addresses. So, and really, this is the essence of my class, the stats, graphs, and data science class, is how to use the science, the stats, the numbers to help you, help the human brain, your educated, trained appraiser brain, ask the right questions. So the computer is really almost infallible on running algorithms, but it takes a human to decide on the model. Is it, which approach is it? Is the cost approach relevant in this case? So basically, using science to sharpen and deepen and broaden the human judgment. Science is not the enemy, it's the friend. We need to capture it and use it to our own benefit. And not only our own benefit, but for the benefit of the consumers, of the taxpayers, the public good, eliminate these economic.
All the other stakeholders. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I made my mission statement about 15 years ago. I said, what am I really after? When I've kind of been in a semi-retired state. And I said, my ideal mission statement is to help prevent the next economic meltdown. Even if it's a little tiny bit that I can help that, that's my mission.
Amen. And I don't think there's anything in the current appraisal process that will raise red flags and identify a potential crisis coming our way. So with that, George, I think we'll probably be doing some follow-ups, because I could talk to you all day about this topic, and maybe we will.
Well, that's my problem. If nothing else, I'll see you December 7th in Sarasota.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
If you've grown frustrated with endlessly pursuing new appraisal work and not reaping any of the benefits, Metro West is here to help. They understand and work to alleviate the pain points commonly felt by appraisers to enable personal and financial growth for their staff. After all, they've been owned and operated by appraisers since the company opened in 1987. Metro West Appraisal is an equal opportunity employer. They're always looking for certified residential real estate appraisers to join their team. Visit metrowestappr.com/careers or email careers@metrowestappr.com. Thank you so much, George and Joan. We really appreciate your time today. And thank you to all of our appraisers for listening to us. And thank you for the sponsors for helping support us. If you have an idea for a future Buzzcast or would like to be interviewed, reach out to us at info@appraisalbuzz.com. Thanks and have a great day.